Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started, so we could get out as soon as possible and try to beat the weather. Um, I wanna first start out talking about the state testing schedule, so you will have an idea of when we will be testing. You should have picked one of these schedules up for your information to keep. Make sure you hold on to this so you can refer back to it when you need to. But we're gonna start out with the ACT on the 27th of this month, that's next week. Our Lost Link exams will start March 1st through April 13th. MAP A will start March 19th through May 11th. ACT Makeup will be on March 19th. I'm sorry, on March 20th. MAP will begin on April 16th through May 18th. And again, we'll have an ACT Makeup on May 8th. So to sum it up, we should be completed with all testing by May 18th. Make sure you keep these dates in mind because it's very important that you are here. If you are scheduled to test and you know that you're not going to be able to make it or be there for testing, make sure you let your STC know and make sure you get it cleared with your principal. I've already spoken to Ms. Fisher about it, and we're going to stick really close to what I'm saying about being here for testing. So make sure you try your best if you're on schedule that you're here. If you cannot be here, make sure you get it cleared with your principal. I guess I was going too fast. Or we're going to talk about the appendix L, test security violations and consequences, and we're also going to talk about the Mississippi Code of Ethics. If you will look in your packet, I gave you a copy of the PowerPoint as well, so you can follow along, or you could just look up at the PowerPoint I have displayed. The purpose of this training is so that we can review the requirements and consequences used to protect the security and integrity of all tests administered in Mississippi. Also to create and maintain testing procedures that give students and staff the ability to test with integrity, validity, and fairness. And also so we can understand the legal and the ethical standards that's associated with Mississippi testing. Why should we care? Because test security equals integrity, which all equals validity. Test security incidents, it threatens the integrity of the assessment, and that could damage the validity of the test results. So we want to make sure we're testing with integrity. Standard 16, this is all included in your Appendix L. You have a copy of the Appendix L, but I'm just going to sum it up through this PowerPoint. If you want to go back and read through some of the things, you're free to do that. School test materials must be kept locked in a storage before and after testing. All secure materials are accounted for before testing and after testing as specified in your school and your district test plan. Make sure when we do start testing and right before we give your MAP assessment or any other assessment, I'll come out and train a select few of teachers, and I will go through your school test plan then, but make sure you know your test plan because that's going to be your saving grace in case something goes wrong or if we have auditors in the building. All TAs must be licensed. Both a TA and a proctor must be present and actively monitoring students the entire time of testing. Whenever you're giving a test, whenever you have test materials in your presence, make sure you have somebody there with you. Do not walk away from the test. If you need to step outside to use the restroom or to do whatever it is, make sure you have someone to step in before you step out. You can't step outside the door and wait at the door for somebody to step in because that means one person's only in the room with the test. So make sure you have two people at all times when you have tests in your presence. At least two people are with test materials from the time the test materials are distributed to the test administrator until all the tests have been turned back in. That means when you go and pick up your test, not just in the testing room, but when you pick up your test materials from the STC, you need somebody there with you. The STC being there is fine, but once you leave her and walk to your classroom, somebody should be with you. Keep in mind, do not ask an auditor if they will escort you to the testing room, because they cannot be the second person. A seating chart is required for each room for all state-directed assessments. It must be signed by the TA and the proctor. So before you leave your room or once you turn in your materials, make sure you have your signature on the seating chart, and your STC will sign it as well. It must include the school name, test date, and the accommodation codes. So if you're testing with accommodations, make sure that the codes are on there. If not, just let your STC know so they'll put those on there for you. Reproducing or disclosing secure materials before, during, and after testing, of course, that's prohibited. Coaching students, altering responses, interfering with responses in any way during and after the scheduled test, that's prohibited. You cannot help students in any way with testing. All appropriate allowable testing accommodations must be provided to students. Make sure, if you know you're testing the students with accommodations, make sure you check with the STC so that student will have those accommodations, because once this test starts, we will have to contact Questar, and if there's a turnaround time to where they have to go back and unlock that test, and we'll have to wait until they do so before we can start retesting that student again. So make sure the codes are there before you even start testing with the students. Anyone with knowledge of or information regarding a possible testing irregularity or alleged security violation, make sure you report it to your STC. They will turn around and report it to me, and I will discuss, if necessary, those allegations with the principal and the superintendent before contacting MDE. The TAs and proctors, you should keep a written record of any testing irregularity occurring during the testing and report those to the STC. If you see something that's unusual going on in the classroom, just document. If you had a problem with anything, document that as well. Not all things will be considered a testing irregularity, but if something else comes up and you may have had computer problems or had to move a student or whatever it may be, just jot that down. So if MDE does contact us about something, we can always pull it and say, okay, this is what happened with the student. No, they weren't sitting there, or whatever it may be. The school prohibits the possession of and or use of any electronic device during the statewide testing. I am the only one who will be allowed to have a cell phone, as well as your tech person. So if you see Chase or Sylvia walking around with the phone during testing, or myself, that's okay. But as far as the TAs, the proctors, hall monitors, you are not to have any type of electronic device. That's including a smartwatch. No smartwatches, cell phones, Bluetooth, anything. You cannot have any type of electronic device. And that goes for the students as well. They cannot have anything on them during testing. Even your headphones, if they're using headphones, make sure that they're not these sophisticated Bluetooth wireless type headphones. They must have just a regular standard type style headphone. Standard 9, this is in your Mississippi Code of Ethics paper. That's in your pack as well. If you look at Standard 9, it just basically says that an educator shall comply with the state and federal laws related to the confidentiality of the student records. That includes your testing materials. Ethical conduct includes, but is not just limited to, the following. There's maintaining the security of standardized test supplies and resources, meaning you cannot discuss anything with anybody about testing. Unethical conduct includes sharing confidential information concerning a student assessment and testing results. If you're not talking about testing results with a parent, you cannot just go around the neighborhood and say so-and-so didn't pass this test and he's this or that. All of this information will be confidential. Violating confidentiality agreements related to testing, including copying or teaching identified test items. If you saw something on the test, you cannot go in your classroom the next day and teach it. You cannot run copies of anything and teach it. All of that should be kept on the lock and key. That is not something that you should be discussing with your students or outside of the school, not even with the other teachers. You will also have a confidentiality agreement to sign before you leave, and that's just basically saying that you understand that you cannot discuss any of those materials with anybody outside of the school. Educating coaching. Any words or action of an educator during a test administration that provides a student with any suggestions or prompt on an assessment. And that could be simply telling the student that the answer is B, telling them that they need to multiply the number in the question to get the answer, pointing to the correct answer, or telling the student to make sure they cite the facts in their essay. Those are prompting the students to actually change their answer or go beyond what they already have down. So you cannot say anything of that nature to students. Also, with student response interference, you cannot tell a student to check your work on number 3 when the student has already selected an answer. Also, you cannot tell a student you need to add more detail to the essay, or just simply pointing to a different answer from what the student have already selected. That would be considered student response interference. If you have to go to a student, to avoid all of this, if you have to go to a student's desk, make sure you have a second person to walk over with you so they could verify that there were no type of communication between you and that student. When you're walking around looking at students and their progress and making sure they're on task, do not stand at a student desk for too long. If you do, MDEs here, they're looking in, they're going to think that you're helping. If you just stand over a student for too long, they will assume and they're going to question why you're doing it. So just be careful with that as well. Principal certification. Your principal will have to sign a certification saying that everything in the building was okay. There were no violations that she's unaware of. So keep that in mind, that not only you, if you decide to do something that's not right, not only you will go down, other people will be responsible for your actions as well. So make sure anything you know or anything you see in the classroom, document and let your STC know if it's something that you feel uncomfortable with or it's something that you know is not right. For a person that's submitting false information, they could be fined up to $250,000 or in prison for up to 3 years or both. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. They are really taking this serious. And I know if something goes down, I am going to have to say something because I can't sit in jail. Just imagine me in jail for 3 years. I can't sit in jail. And I really can't tough up $250,000 either. So I would have to do the jail time. Takeover of the assessment. In the case of any verified testing irregularity that jeopardizes the security and integrity of the test, MDE may take control of the statewide test administration in the school district by obtaining complete control of the test booklets. If they come and they see something's not right, they can take over. They can come in and give the test. However, it's going to be violation of the district. There's going to be fees that the district will have to I guess they're going to have to pay up is what I'm trying to say. I can't get my words together. Cough up. If they do have to come in and test, because there's going to be salaries that we're going to have to pay. So keep in mind, make sure that you're not doing anything that you shouldn't be doing, because if they come in and they see it, they can't just come in and take control of the test, and we can't do anything about it. But let them have control and pay all fees that occurred from it. infractions. Some common infractions that MDE has noticed through visitations of other schools, and that's simply failure to administer the test, failure to provide appropriate accommodations. I know they mentioned that one school they walked in and everybody that the school district or the school felt they couldn't read had read aloud accommodations. Didn't have an IEP, didn't have a sped ruling. They just said, okay, this child has struggled since so-and-so grade in reading, we're going to give them read aloud accommodations. You cannot do that. Possession of electronic devices, that's another major concern that they have seen in the schools. Failure to secure test materials. When you have an auditor to come in, they're going to come in and watch from the time you distribute the test, how the test is being administered, and most likely from the time you take up the test. So make sure that your materials are secure at all times when they're in your possession. And also incorrect MSIS numbers. If you, and hopefully we don't ever have anybody like this, but I was telling the STCs last week that MDE had a problem because there were twins that had the same exact name. Like Sue Anderson. Both of them, Sue Anderson. They had different middle names, but they had the same exact names. And in that case, it's easy to get those MSIS numbers mixed up. So make sure you have the right, I know. So just make sure you have the right person in your classroom with the right emphasis number. And there are some inferences too where you may have students in different grades that's not even related with the same name, if they're really common names, like John Jones or whatever. You may have one in the 9th grade and one in the 12th grade or whatever. I don't know how common that name would be, but you may have two kids in the same school with the same exact name. But in that case, just make sure you have the right person in your room with the right MSIS number that's testing. Providing coaching, again, that's a common infraction, and it could be something that you're really not aware of, but simply interfering with the student test response, tapping on the desk for clues. I hope no one even thinks about trying to give clues and say, okay, one tap, that means the answer is A, two tap is B, or whatever. Please do not do that. Pointing to the test materials, hand signals, that's prohibited. Any type of facial expression, even if you're testing accommodated students, you cannot give any type of clues whatsoever. Again, lingering behind or next to a student while viewing the student's work on a test question. If you're there for too long, that will throw up red flags as well. Verbal communication, such as great work, is a common infraction. Good job, keep trying, check your work, you still have time. Just walk around and don't say anything to the students. That's the easy way out. Now, if you have a student that's sleeping, that's different. It's okay to ask the student to step outside or to continue working. But that's all you can say. Do not have a full-blown conversation and say, baby, what's wrong? Did something happen at home last night? Did you not sleep? You cannot do that. Just ask them to continue working. And if you notice that they're still doing it, it's okay to just ask them to step outside, and the hall monitor will take them from there and let them get water or wash their face or whatever they need to do.
We need to document that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something that you would really document. Not actively monitoring students, TA or proctor leaving only one person with test materials. That's one of the cases where you have to use the restroom and you're standing at the door open, but you're still standing there, and you're waiting till the hall monitor comes from down the hall, where you still have just one person in the room. So make sure you remain inside the classroom until that person comes. Issuing incorrect secure materials. Prime example would be your student tickets. Make sure you're giving that ticket to the person that it belongs to. Not adhering to the school test plan. And that simply goes to if your test plan say you're going to let one boy, one girl out at a time for the restroom, and then you're letting two girls out at a time, MDE sees that, there's gonna be infraction, invalidation. So make sure you're mindful of that. Not verify the number of secure materials. I want to point out, when you have scratch paper, please do not get scratch paper from your printer in the classroom if you need more. You must go to your STC. If you have an auditor there, that auditor will be looking at how the test materials handed out and distributed and things like that. And when you bring your materials back, and on that paper, your STC says that they gave you 25 and they're sitting there counting and they've counted 28, that auditor is standing right there looking at that STC. They're going to want to know where did those other two sheets come from. So make sure you go to your STC. They'll give you more paper. Just go to them to let them know you need more paper, so they could document that. And when you bring it back, it'll all be there with the numbers matching. Consequences. How will MDE know there's been some type of problems in our school? We will have tests and audits. It is known or said by MDE that at least one school in every district will be audited. Last year they went to the middle school, so I wouldn't say the high school will be off the hook. So just be careful with that. Reports of testing irregularities that could come from myself, that could come anonymously from a teacher or somebody on the outside, because their student came home and said that Johnny raised their hand and asked a question and so told them the answer, but when I raised my hand, they told me they couldn't say anything to me. So it could be something, a report from a parent, and any other type of allegations that they may see or come from the outside or from the inside that they may have to investigate. So don't think that they won't find out. They will. Somebody will say something. Consequences, student or district test invalidation. They can invalidate the whole class test. They can invalidate the whole district test or the school test. There was one school, I know I kind of networked with other DTCs, and their teacher mistimed their whole class test because MDE in their manual, they said this test was 157 minutes, and unfortunately, their teacher could not calculate what 157 minutes were. So it wasn't timed right, and MDE invalidated the entire class test. So things like that, when I say district or school test, it doesn't have to be just one student. It could be the entire class or multiple students or even the district itself. Removal of a teacher license. If it comes to that point, MDE can hold your license to where you cannot teach for so many years in the state of Mississippi. A letter of warning will be sent or can be sent to the district. A citation can be placed on the district accreditation record, and a downgrade of the district or school accountability level. We're seeing now something happening. They think it's fit. They can downgrade our level to a D, and so forth. Audits and data analysis. Again, at least one school from every district will be audited. Audits are conducted to observe the following: the storage and distribution of the test, the preparation of the test for the test, adequacy of the testing environment, processes and procedures of test administration. Again, know your test plan, because it may be something to where they come and ask you, okay, what do you do in case of emergency or tornado drill or whatever? You need to be able to say what you're going to do. Return of materials and testing fidelity itself. Forensic analysis, how they're going to actually find out that this stuff is truthful and it really happened. Well, they do use a software called Cavion, test security software, and that's a software that kind of look at the patterns of the testing and erasure marks and things like that of students. Now will be online, so I don't know how they're going to use erasure But in that case, I'm pretty sure they'll look at your time and any changes, back and forth of the test. They can timestamp tests. That's another thing when I say timing. If they find that something is not right about a test, they can contact Questar and ask Questar for a timestamp, and they will provide that information to them. So make sure you're mindful of that as well, that it is a way for them to find out. Are there any questions on test prep, and administering the test? When we start, your biggest involvement would be your math test. When we get closer to time to test for math, I will come out and do another training specifically on math itself. Today's training was just on the law, on what you should and shouldn't do, and the consequences if you do decide to do something. So you will know that. So if you don't have any more questions on the law itself, that's all I have for you. I tried to kind of go as fast as possible so you can get out and beat the storm for what it's worth. I think I probably, did I make the record? I did. I was close.